Main aim of this paper today is to reflect on the possibilities to connect two research fields which only recently have been systematically connected. That is, the reconstruction of the process of production, use and transformation of knowledge, and second, spatial approaches to late medieval and early modern urban spaces. Focal point of the short presentation will be the city of Deventer. You may see here a 17th century map designed by the Dutch mapmaker Blauw. Lane, as you may have seen on the RSA River, Deventer was in the 15th century one of the main market towns in the eastern Netherlands, a real node in the commercial routes linking the Rhinelands and the North Sea coast. Deventer was most famous because of the several year fairs, held several times a year. With 5 different fairs spread across the calendar, the city held fairs for at least 11 weeks per year. The city was moreover part of the Hanseatic League, the commercial confederation linking cities across Western Europe and the Rhineland. Next to its commercial ambitions, Deventer was the city of the modern devotion, one of the most influential late medieval religious movement, which had started in Deventer at the end of the 14th centuries with the activities of its foreman Geert Groote. Essential to mention this context is a strong stress within the movement on personal learning and growth, the importance of reading and collecting books, and the activities related to the translation of religious texts in the vernacular. This focus on books and learning was also visible outside the religious space of modern devout communities, in the production of manuscript and in early printing press activities, which were strictly connected to the presence of a renowned Latin school, and you see here a maquette of the school, and the heyday of the Deventer Latin School rose beyond any doubt the last decade of the 15th century, when Director Alexander Hegius, who died in 1498, was responsible for a teaching renewal influenced by Italian humanism. He encouraged a better and more modern approach to the study of Latin and, most importantly, introduced Greek as one of the most important courses. This led, to show you but one example, to the design and print of booklets for the learning of Greek, using, probably for the first time in Northern Europe, Greek printing types. Before moving to the second part of this presentation, a short reflection on the terminology used. The term knowledge follows the definition given by Roger Chartier in a recent article in the Annales. It is necessarily broad, but its broadness allows to use it as a theoretical framework, in particular because it shows an intrinsic dynamism and because it stresses its main condition of being transferable. This last point, the transferability, can best be approached through a spatial lens, as for example has been stated by, to cite once more but 2 examples, the British geographer David Livingstone and the French historian Christian Jacob. Thinking of knowledge as spatial, especially when urban spaces are taken into consideration, also intersects with the latest trends in urban history, expressed, for example, in one of the last issues of the journal Urban History, which pleads for a shift from place to process and transforms the city into a laboratory for reconstructing processes and dynamics of knowledge production and exchange. Taking the city as an interpretational framework instead of separating places and nodes of production is a necessary step, as the traditional reconstruction of knowledge production tends to fragment and separate processes and agents. Religious communities, libraries, workshops, the town hall, the domestic space, and many others could be added, are often studied as closed or even enclosed entities, creating a complex dynamic of visibility and invisibility of knowledge processes with a strong stress on inclusion and exclusion. The most important result of this approach is, for example, in the case of Deventer, the strict separation between the communities under influence of the modern devotion and the lay urban population, were scarcely ever considered in terms of connections and exchange. This image may change if we would take into consideration a topographical approach to knowledge, describing availability and circulation of knowledge in the cityscape. A good example of how a topography of knowledge could work is a prior book dated in the late 15th century, presently kept at the Deventer City Library. The manuscript's colophons refer to the owner, Katharina Kersken, and gives her address. It also stresses the importance of taking the book back to the rightful owner in case it is lost, and you can read this information in the colophon, as said, which has been translated from Middle Dutch. A second note on the flyleaf in a later hand reveals that the manuscript at a later stage was owned by, and I quote from the note, Sister Agnes, and that this Sister Agnes was sharing on ownership with Derek. Both women, Agnes and Derek, were leading a religious life in two communities of Sisters of Common Life, under influence of the modern devotion. Agnes and Derek, as we learn from Katharina's testament, were Katharina's nieces. This object and the two ownership notes offer the possibility to rethink Deventer's processes of knowledge transfer spatially. The manuscript has been produced in the ISO area, and we know that from the decoration, possibly even in Deventer itself, which implies also the wide availability of the transcribed religious text in this specific urban area. It had been privately owned and possibly used in the domestic space, but was also, as we may infer from the request to take the book back to its owners, was also circulating within a personal, possibly even more extended network. Probably through donation, the manuscript was then used within a religious community, but even in this case, ownership was shared, somehow crossing the walls of these closed or even enclosed religious spaces, and once more enlarging the networks of use and exchange, and stressing the importance of thinking in terms of sharing and circulation. Bookshops, domestic and religious spaces are all included in the traces left in this object. The thin thread which connects these places is one of the possible research lines to investigate late medieval and early modern cultures and societies.